Hey everyone, welcome to class. Thank you so much for turning on your cameras. It's great to see so many people here today. My name is Ben. If you're new to the Demon, let's see here. Thanks, Abigail, Eric. I don't know who launched the poll, but thank you. How long have you been studying for the LSAT? Okay. Some of you have just started, 8% of you. Wow, some of you, 18% of you have been studying for the LSAT for 6 to 12 months, 10% of you more than a year. Most of you are kind of in the middle. It looks like they're 1 to 3 months. Anyways, that's nice to know. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about there, Eric? Abigail? Abigail, I can't even see you. Where are you? Let's see here. Okay. Well, I trust that you're here. Eric, are you here by yourself? Are you flying solo?
No, Abigail should be here as well.
Okay. I don't know why I can't see her, but cool. Oh, your video won't start. Well, there you go. Good luck. Hopefully you can figure that out. If you do have any questions, by the way, as we go through this class, you can always ask Eric, you can ask Abigail. You can send it to the group, or you can just directly message them and they will get back to you, probably with better answers than maybe I'll even come up with. So please, yeah, take advantage of them. Anyways, my name is Ben. I'm one of the co-founders of LSAT Demon. Our main goal here is to help you understand how the LSAT is easy. That might sound a little bit strange depending on your experience with the LSAT, but when you slow down and really focus on trying to understand what you're reading in logical reasoning, reading comp, and even in the games, when you just slow down and try to understand what the passage is saying, on your own terms, right? You're like, okay, this is what this sentence is saying. This is what the person seems to be trying to say to me. And you understand that, then in the vast majority of cases, the problem with the logic falls into place, right? And then you see what's wrong with the argument or whatever is going on. And then the questions become easier, right? In most cases, people are getting questions wrong because they're misreading something in the passage, or they're misreading the question, or they're misreading one or more of the answer choices, right? And if you can really buy into this idea that, hey, I just need to slow down and start working on my comprehension of what I'm reading, then the LSAT can start to get a lot easier. That means we don't focus on common tips or tricks that you might read out there or get from other preparation companies, because they're trying to, well, I don't know what they're trying to do, but I imagine that the appeal of some sort of tricks or tips is that, oh, if I just do this one thing, then I'm going to start, doing better on the LSAT. Or if I could just read the question first or something like that, oh, it's going to get easier now. And unfortunately, this test is really designed to test your reading comprehension, your ability to understand what you're reading. So if you can realize that that's the actual goal and then start focusing on developing that skill, then although it's not an immediate like, oh, just start doing this and wow, it's going to get easier, that is the real solution in the long run. And so actually you can make progress faster. In fact, some of those tips and tricks out there can do more harm than good, unfortunately. But in any case, I do want to talk about logical reasoning along those lines really quick before we do 9 logical reasoning questions today. The way this is going to work is I'm going to talk about logical reasoning, then you all are going to do set 1. So you see that on the syllabus, you have 3 questions in set 1. You're going to go ahead and do that on your own. And then tell me in the poll or the survey which questions you want to go over. Depending on what you guys want to do, I'll go over 1 or 2 or 3 of those questions from set 1, and I'll show you, I'll model how I want you to attack these questions. And then we'll go ahead and do the second set. You can try to implement some of what you observe, and then we'll do the same thing again with the third set, okay? If there's time at the end, I'm happy to take any questions about whatever, logical reasoning or the LSAT in general. But before we do set 1, I just briefly want to talk about the 5, maybe you could call them stages of a logical reasoning question. Okay. So there's nothing magical about this. It's not like if you didn't know about the 5 stages, oh, you wouldn't do well on the test. It's just a framework for helping you get your mind wrapped around where things are happening as you go through a logical reasoning question. Okay. So here are the 5 stages. Stage 1 is reading the passage, right? Okay. That's step 1 or stage 1. Then when you're done reading the passage, but before you read the question, that's stage 2. There's going to be some evaluation. You're going to need to evaluate what you just read. Then step 3 or stage 3 is the question itself. You have to read what the question says, right? Which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument above, or something like that. Okay, then stage 4 or step 4, there's not any magical term here, just the space between you reading the question and the 5 answer choices. You're going to want to make a prediction, right? So you're reading the passage, step 1. You're then analyzing the passage, step 2. Step 3, you're then reading the question. And then step 4, you're making a prediction. And then step 5 is finally going through the 5 answer choices and picking an answer. Now, the reason I'm taking a second here to say those 5 stages is not so much that you need to remember that. I just want to hit home very, I want to hit this idea hard for you so that you understand it, that there's these 2 stages that most people don't even think about that take place between the passage and the question, and then between the question and the 5 answer choices, right? And it's steps or stages that people skip all the time, right? They read the passage like, okay, yeah, I think I get that. They read the question. They're like, okay, I think I understand what it's asking me. Now let me go look for an answer that answers that question. It's a more passive way of attacking logical reasoning or the test in general, because what you're doing is you're sort of reading information and hoping that something pops out at you, right? Like, oh, that makes sense, or that doesn't sound correct, or that does sound correct. Instead, I want you to take a much more proactive stance towards the test. You read the passage, you really try to understand it, you try to make sense of it. Do you understand it on your own terms? If your cousin walked up to you and said, what was that all about? Could you explain it to them in your own words? I ask people to do this all the time in tutoring, right? One-on-one tutoring. I'd say, hey, read the passage. Tell me what it's saying. They read the passage, and then I say, okay, what did that passage say to you? Or what's the point of that passage? What's the author trying to get us to understand? And when someone looks back at the passage and starts rereading the first sentence, that's a big red flag that they didn't really own what the passage was saying. They just kind of passively read it, right? And there's some understanding going on there, but not enough. I want you to read this passage and get what the person is trying to tell you, so then you can look away from the passage, turn toward your cousin, and start explaining it. Like, hey, this idiot just said that there's water on Mars, therefore there must be life on Mars, right? And you can decide about whether or not you think that argument makes sense or is valid or is logical. And so 1, you're telling your cousin what the argument is, but 2, then you're saying why you think it's either good or bad. In this case, I would say it's pretty bad. Just because there's water on Mars doesn't mean there's going to be life on Mars, right? But in any case, the point is that step one is really reading and owning and understanding the passage. Become the expert in the room when it comes to that passage. Step two is then making sure you have identified whether that's an argument or a set of facts, right? Did you identify that the passage is a set of facts? Okay, great. There's not going to be a whole lot more to do now except determine what else must be true on the basis of those facts. Or did you determine that that passage is an actual argument with a conclusion? If it is an argument with a conclusion, then you need to decide, did the evidence that the author gave me for that conclusion prove that conclusion? If it didn't prove it, then you want to take a moment to identify why. And that's the thing that a lot of people skip, right? They read the passage and then they go right to the question. No, you need to read, understand, and then decide, okay, what's going on here? If it is an argument, then there is a conclusion. Do you think that conclusion is proven? In 95% of the cases that you encounter an argument, the conclusion is not proven. That's a very high standard, right? It doesn't matter if the conclusion is likely to be true given what the evidence said. The question is, does it have to be true? And if it doesn't have to be true, your job is to point out one possible reason why it might not have to be true. And if you can do that, then you're going to get so much better at logical reasoning. And that's the thing that takes people a second to do. And they feel rushed, so they don't take the time to do it. And they say, well, I don't have time to do this on the actual test. I can't sit here and think about what's wrong with this argument because that takes me 30 seconds or that takes me 5 minutes. Okay, it might. You might not be as fast at it right now, but that's why you need to do it, because you get faster at what you do. So if you practice reading arguments, taking the time it takes to understand them, and then deciding why the conclusion isn't necessarily proven, unless it actually is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, I think this has to be true. If I accept all this evidence as true, then I think that conclusion has to be true. And then I go into the question, fine. But if you think there's a problem, you want to take the time to identify that problem so you get faster at identifying problems. And by the way, too, just a side note here, if you have any attorney friends and you give them, does anyone here have attorney friends? Okay, a decent number of us. If you give them a logical reasoning question that, they haven't seen the LSAT for ever maybe, and you say, hey, what do you think of this argument? A lot of times they're very good at identifying why the reasoning doesn't prove the conclusion. It kind of illustrates how the test does a decent job of assessing your ability to eventually reason in the way that attorneys often have to reason, right? So if you're struggling with it now, this is a great opportunity to get better at it, because it's not only going to help you with the LSAT, it's also going to help you with law school and then eventually your legal practice. But okay, so step one, read and understand the argument. Step two, analyze it. Is the argument proven or not proven? Step three, read the question. Make sure you understand what the question is asking. Step four, now that you've read the question, you can make a prediction. If they say, which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument above, you want to think about something that would help the argument. If you've done all the steps in order correctly up to this point, it should be fairly easy to make a prediction. Because if you've identified what's wrong with the argument and they ask you to strengthen that argument, then you just think about, okay, well, this is what the argument was missing. I'd really love an answer that says that, or something along those lines. Now, of course, your prediction is not going to be worded the exact same way the LSAT's going to word it, but it's often, close. Or at least it touches on the same idea. The LSAT tends to be very formal and obnoxious in some ways, but the important point here is that you've predicted the idea or the problem that needs to be fixed. And so then it becomes easier to identify the correct answer. If it's asking you to weaken the argument, same thing. You now know a problem with the argument. So a good weakener would come in there and exploit that weakness. I'd say, oh, by the way, did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about those cases where water existed, but life didn't? That's taking advantage of the weakness in the argument, right? Okay, so you make a prediction, that's step 4, and then finally you go into the answer choices and you're going through them quickly. Now, this is the one thing that I want to emphasize. We're taking our time up front, right? But then when we're going through the answer choices, we're going fairly quickly. Because when you read an answer choice, what are the odds that it's going to be correct? Answer choice A. What are the chances that answer choice A is right? Yeah, 20%, right? Low. Chances are it's going to be wrong. So as you're reading through an answer choice, if anything about it seems fishy or not good enough for what you're looking for, move on. Now, you may move on prematurely in some cases, but the point is that we can actually move quickly through the answer choices if we've done our homework. You may have some cases where you eliminate all 5 and then you have to go back and reevaluate your answer choices. But I'd rather you be in that more aggressive stance where you've made a prediction, you have some idea of what you're looking for, and then you're eliminating the answer choices because they don't pass the sniff test fast enough. So oftentimes you don't have to read. I mean, in most cases, actually, you're not reading the entire answer choice unless it's something that you think might be correct. Because if you think it might be correct, then every word in that answer choice needs to make sense. So for correct answers, you are going to be reading the whole answer. You may read the whole answer for some answers that turn out to be wrong. But anyways, in a lot of cases, you don't have to do that. Josh, you said, is it worth disproving every choice? No, you don't need to disprove them. All you need to do is say, okay, there's something about the 5th word that I just don't like, and you move on. Right now, if you can't choose an answer, then you might need to go back and be more critical and maybe be confident about why you're getting rid of 4 of them so you can then choose whatever's left. But that's just one way of getting to the correct answer, and it's not the way you need to use every time, and it's very slow. Yeah, Taylor, sometimes they will all seem wrong to you. That's a good problem to have. That means you're being critical of bad answers, as opposed to the opposite problem, where people are like, well, like 2 or 3 of them seem potentially good to me. Well, think of a scale. You're either overly cynical or overly critical, or you're overly lenient, you're overly generous. I'd rather you be on the overly critical side and occasionally knock them all out and then try again than be overly lenient, which is going to mean if you're overly lenient, then that means you're reading wrong answer choices longer than other people, right? If your critical scale is high, if you've tuned it up, 3 or 4 words into an answer choice, you might be like, I'm out of here. This sucks. And you leave. But if your critical scale is like low and you're not very critical, you're going to read more of each wrong answer choice, right? Which is just going to slow you down. Okay. Let's see here on that note. During practice, I actually purposely read all the answer choices so I can see the wrong answer patterns. But when I do a practice test, then I can pick my answer and go. No, you still do want to read all. So here's the balance here. We want to read all 5 answer choices. So let's say I read A and I'm halfway through answer choice A and I think, nah, this isn't good. I move on. I read B. I like everything in B, so I keep it open. I read C, I cross it out. I read D, I cross it out. And then I read E. And as I'm reading through E, I may say, wait a sec, this sounds kind of good too. And then I go back to B and realize there's actually a problem with B. I cross out B and I pick E. I can't do that if I don't read all 5 answer choices. So you do want to start reading all 5 answer choices. If you can come up with a reason why you think that's wrong, then just cross it out and move on. But you don't want to not read an answer choice at all. Okay. Lex, you said on average, how long should it take us to get to the point where we can make a prediction? Lex, are you asking how long studying wise? Like you're saying, hey, I do this for a month, I do this for 2 months, I do this for 3 months. It is going to be different. Yeah, you can unmute. Go for it, Lex.
So what I really meant by that, I mean, in a particular question, not necessarily, for studying, but we know that time is of the essence on this test, and I feel like that's my biggest shortcoming is not having enough time. I just wanted to know in your mind, because you said there's however many steps to the step where we can make a prediction. I forgot what step it is already. I'm sorry. To the step where we can make a prediction. Do you have like a time, like, 2 minutes or like 3 minutes, depending, it usually takes like what, an hour? No, a minute and 30 something
Yeah.
seconds per
Yeah.
question.
So Lex, you raise like a super, like probably maybe the most common self-assessment that people make when they're studying for the LSAT that turns out to be wrong. And that is, oh, my biggest problem is time. Your biggest problem isn't time. Your biggest problem is understanding the test. Because when you start to understand the test, time will take care of itself. And so what you want to focus on first is if you do a 35-minute section, let's say you get to, right now you're getting to 15 questions and you're like, oh, I can't get to the last 10. Gosh, if I could only get to the last 10, I'd be doing a lot better. So my problem is time. But you can get to those last 10 if you start understanding the test better. And you can't do that if you're always trying to finish. So instead, what you want to focus on is, okay, maybe I can only do 10 questions in a section in 35 minutes, but can I get 100% accuracy on those questions? If someone comes to me and they say, look, I can only do 10 questions in 35 minutes, but I can get them all right, then I can, it's like, okay, so you're starting to understand the test. You can solve it. Keep practicing, because with time, you're eventually going to be able to do 11 questions and 12 questions and 15 questions, and you'll be able to get them all right, and you'll be able to do them in time. And then eventually you'll get to 25 questions. But if you're doing 25 questions and only getting 15 of them right, we don't know why you're missing those 10. And so, we don't have any clear sense of how well you understand or don't understand the test. So focus on getting them right first. And that may mean for some people, they can only do 5 questions in 35 minutes, and people will pull their hair out. Like, there's no way I can do this test if I can only get to 5 questions. But that's the step you have to take. You have to get to base camp first, then you can start climbing Mount Everest, right? Like, you have to achieve these certain things first. And so does that mean that for some questions you may sit on it for 5 minutes to try to make a prediction? Yeah, maybe. But the next time you do a question, you will be faster because you forced yourself through that actual workout. I hope that makes sense. Okay. When you say understand the test, do you mean like understanding the question we are reading? Like in the beginning of the class, you said be able to describe to a friend? Yes. Understand what you're reading, understand why that argument is good or bad. There are so many arguments you're going to read when you first start studying for the LSAT that you say, yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that sounds good. And then the question will say, which one of the following best describes the flaw in reasoning? You're like, oh, I didn't know it was flawed. Thought it sounded good. So there's something you're missing there, right? And that's what you need to understand. Did you misread some of the sentences, and now once you read them correctly, you can see the flaw? Or did you read the sentences correctly, but you don't understand the logical mistake that's taking place? Either one of those problems needs to be fixed. And if you fix it, it will unlock hundreds of questions in the future. But if you just get through the process and pick an answer and have a vague sense of what happened, you're going to make the same mistake again. So we're slowing down your progress now to really make sure you understand this so that in the future, all the progress you're making is really on solid ground. The analogy here is like going to the gym and having good form, right? When you use actual good form at the gym, a lot of times you have to drop the weight, you have to drop the reps because you can't do as much as you actually thought you could when you were cheating. But you now know if you do good form, whatever progress you make is actual progress. You're like, oh, I really can do 12 reps at this weight. That's for real. So the next time I come back, I'm going to be able to do a little bit better. Eric, yeah, the steps really quick. I don't want to overcomplicate it. 5 may just be too many, but step 1 is it's just in order. Step 1 is read and understand the passage. Step 2 is analyze the passage before you read the question. Step 3 is to read the question. Step 4 is to make a prediction based on the question you just read. And step 5 is then to go through the answer choices quickly. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, Morgan, cool. Thanks for those notes. Any last questions before we just jump in and do this? Because I think the best way to learn this, right, is to go ahead and do this first set, and then I will answer some of these questions after you guys are done, and I will go through these 5 steps, and you can see what's happening and how it plays out. Okay. Okay. Yeah. About those abstract ones, thanks, Abigail, for responding there. That's if you run into something that doesn't make sense, that's the LSAT telling you, hey, this is something you're not good at understanding. And now that you know that the goal of the test is to test your reading comprehension, you can say, oh, good, this is an opportunity for me to take something I'm not good at and get better at by just sitting there. I remember when I was studying for the test one time, there was a question that I just could not get my mind wrapped around. I knew what the correct answer was. I read some explanation that someone gave me, but I don't know. I just couldn't get my mind wrapped around what the hell was going on. And I was drawing little pictures to try to help myself make sense of it. I put my head down on the desk. I felt like I was thinking about it for like 20 minutes. But then something clicked, right? Something like a light bulb. I'm like, oh, that's what they're saying. And then it all made sense, right? Like you have to force your neurons through that process to get stronger and better at understanding convoluted shit. But as you do that, it will make all the other sentences that you encounter later easier to deconstruct and make sense of. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do that first set. Good luck. When you're finished, fill out the poll so I know that you're done and which questions you want to go over. Thank you. Okay, great. Looks like most of us are finished. If you're not, sorry to interrupt. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the moderation question for sure, and probably feathers. If you want to go over Tasmanian, I will just do that at the end to save us some time. But let's jump in. Let's talk about moderation. I'm going to try to model this approach that I was explaining at the beginning. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Antonio, one can live a life of moderation by never deviating from the middle course. Okay, I don't know what exactly the middle course is, but I guess this makes sense. You stay in the middle, you never go off and do other things, and that's moderation. But then one loses the joy of spontaneity and misses the opportunities that come to those who are occasionally willing to take great chances or to go too far. Okay, if you follow this path of moderation, stay in the middle, then two things are going to happen. One, you're not going to have the joy that apparently comes from spontaneity, and you're going to miss some opportunities that make sense because you're like a lemming. You do just the simple, non-risky stuff. Okay, I don't really see an argument here. Antonio has just told us two things. Antonio hasn't even said whether a life of moderation is good or bad. I mean, Antonio has told us that there are these two things that sound bad. They will happen if you live a life of moderation. But so, yeah, but there's no explicit conclusion saying, therefore, don't live a life of moderation, right? It just kind of stops. Okay, Marla, what does she say? But one who, in the interests of moderation, never risks going too far is actually failing to live a life of moderation. Okay, why? One must be moderate even in one's moderation. Okay, I guess if you always stay the middle course, right? There's something oddly not moderate about that. You're very consistent. You're lacking any sort of moderation in terms of inconsistency. Like you're strictly staying in the middle. Okay. I think I understand what both of them are saying. The question says Antonio and Marla disagree over. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to make a prediction. What do I think they're disagreeing about? Marla is saying if you stay in the middle, right, you're not going to be moderate. You need moderation even in your moderation. But Antonio is saying one can live a life of moderation by never, I don't know why I didn't catch that the first time, but by never deviating from the middle course. That's oddly strong, right? So Antonio thinks you can live a life of moderation by staying in the middle. Marla is saying that's not a life of moderation. So they seem to be disagreeing about what makes something a life or makes a life of moderation. Do they disagree about whether it is desirable for people to occasionally take great chances in life? They don't talk about whether this is good or bad. Ultimately, this is one thing I was thinking about when I was evaluating Antonio's argument. He actually never makes a claim about whether you should live a life of moderation. So that's not going to work. B, what a life of moderation requires of a person. They do disagree about that. Antonio thinks that means you can never deviate from the middle course. Marla thinks you actually need to. So that sounds like the answer. C, whether it is possible for a person to embrace other virtues. Didn't talk about other virtues. Done. D, how often a person ought to deviate from the middle course in life. Marla doesn't even talk about that. How much should you or should you not do something? Antonio doesn't talk about what you should or shouldn't do either. So that's wrong. I could have stopped at the word ought. E, whether it is desirable. Again, I'm not going to read the rest of E. we didn't talk about what is desirable or what is good or what should happen. We just talked about what does in fact happen or what makes something a life of moderation. So the answer has got to be B. Questions on this question? I know several of you wanted to talk about it. Raise your hand if you have any questions. What difficulty is this question? It looks like it's a difficulty 2. Okay, Ryan, go ahead.
Hey, Ben, quick question.
Yep.
I accidentally, well, not accidentally, I intended to, but I made a mistake of choosing D. And you said the word ought is what steered you away from answer choice D. So what is it about the word ought? Like you said, it's something about the word should or something?
Yeah, exactly. So answers A, D, and E, although we'll just start with D for now, talk about what should happen, right? Like if I said to you, you should wake up every morning at 6 a.m., that's a very different claim than you do wake up every morning at 6 a.m. When I say you should do that, we have no clue what you actually do. And when I say that you do that, we have no clue what you should actually do. Right? It's like they're two different universes. So talking about what should happen versus talking about what is happening is something the LSAT loves to test all the time. And answers A, D, and E are alluding to what should happen. But the passages weren't about what should happen. Neither Antonio nor Marla talked about whether you should live a life of moderation or not. They just talked about things that happen if you do or how you do it. Radina, go ahead.
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
actually got rid of D because I thought they kind of agreed over this. So I don't know if this was a good way of thinking about it, but it said that they, or to go too far. Like I thought that it's good to branch off. That's what they were both kind of agreeing on. If that
Okay.
makes sense. Does that
So,
make sense?
Yes, but I don't think that's the right reason for getting rid of
Okay.
this. So let's talk about this for a half second. Let's just talk about whenever you're doing a disagree question, if you have any sort of confusion during the test or after when you're reviewing, break it down. So deal with one person at a time. For example, Antonio. Does Antonio say that you should live a life of moderation by
No.
not deviating from the middle course?
Like he never said like what you should or shouldn't do. He didn't really take a position.
You're
Not
absolutely
one.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
So Antonio does do one thing. Antonio says you can live a life of moderation by not deviating.
Mhm.
And then Antonio tells us two things that will happen if you do that. And they sound a little negative, right? Losing the joy of spontaneity and missing opportunities. Those sound like negative things. So we might infer loosely, or we might speculate that Antonio thinks living a life of moderation is not a good thing, but Antonio never says that. And Antonio could go on and say, but it's still the best course of action because there's all this other shit that's going to happen if you don't do this.
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
that alone is enough to kill this answer because we need an answer in which one person clearly agrees and the other clearly disagrees. Lex, question.
So it's not really a question. It's more of a statement. I guess in my brain, and I find myself doing this a lot, I took middle course and tried to fit it into Marla's statement, you know? So I was like, oh, what's something like, can I take middle course and moderation and relate them to each other? And then that's how I came up with D. And I was like, like she's saying that a person shouldn't really, I guess how often a person should deviate from a middle course, but then it didn't make sense in my head until after you answered it. So it's like, that's where I get stuck up on, is trying to substitute in my words, like paraphrasing. You understand? This is where paraphrasing becomes a bit difficult for me because sometimes it's hard to understand and change words,
You're absolutely right. I mean, part of reframing what the test is saying in your own words does demand that you reframe it in a way that doesn't misstate the test, right? A lot of times people oversimplify what they read. I'm glad you're trying to restate what you read in your own words, but you want to restate it as simply as possible without losing the key details in the sentence that distinguish it from some other claim. It's a tough skill to develop, but you can, and as you do, you will get so much better at this test. Okay, great questions. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and do feathers. Same thing. So step 1, I'm going to read the passage, try to understand it. Step 2, I'm going to evaluate it. Step 3, read the question. Step 4, make a prediction. And then step 5, go through the answers quickly. Feathers. Oh, I thought feathers there for a second was like a somebody's last name. But anyways, feathers recently taken from seabirds, stuffed and preserved in the 1880s, have been found to contain only half as much mercury as feathers recently taken from living birds of the same species. Okay, interesting. They found these birds that had been preserved a long time ago, and they looked at the mercury in them, and there's less mercury in those feathers than there is from the birds living today. I mean, I'm not super surprised about that. I hear about mercury in the environment all the time. You can't eat anything without worrying about mercury, or like, salmon or whatever. So this isn't super surprising. We've polluted our world. Since mercury that accumulates in a seabird's feathers as the feathers grow is derived from fish eaten by the bird. Okay, so the mercury that comes into the feathers is coming from mercury that was in the fish that the birds ate. These results indicate that mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. Okay. I do think that this is very likely the case, just given my understanding of mercury and whatnot. But that's not my job. My job isn't to agree with conclusions. My job is to figure out whether the conclusion is proven. So does it have to be 100% true that because there's a difference in the amount of mercury between these old dead stuffed birds and the current living ones, that mercury levels are now higher in saltwater fish? Can I think of any other reasons why mercury might have been lower in the stuffed birds? The thing that comes to my mind right away is, okay, is there something about the fact that this is like a preserved animal that it's not a good, I don't know, it's like losing mercury over time? Or, I mean, that would be my main concern. And therefore it actually had more mercury a long time ago. Caitlin, you had your hand up. You're good?
I was thinking the exact same thing. I was like, maybe live birds just have more mercury, and then a dead bird that's been like preserved for a long time, maybe it just depletes. That was where I was going, but then you said the same exact thing.
Yeah. It's just like evaporating over time. I don't know how mercury works, but like there is that possibility, right? Therefore, this conclusion isn't proven. Maybe there's something else going on here too. Maybe the birds are eating more fish, or the mercury is moved around in the fish so that it's more absorbable, right? They talk about this with like daily vitamins. You can take vitamins and they don't get absorbed into your system, but different vitamins can be absorbed depending on the form that they take. Anyways, that's my concern with this conclusion. It's probably true, but I don't think it's proven. There are some potential problems here. And then the question says, the argument depends on assuming that. Okay, and so then I got to find an assumption, and the word depends tells me that we're looking for a necessary assumption. So what is an assumption that the argument is making? What is something that the argument is assuming that it has to assume? It depends on this assumption. So as I go through these answer choices, I'm going to ask myself, is this something that the author has to agree with? Does the author have to agree with this answer choice? If the author would have to agree with this answer choice, then that's the correct answer. If the author doesn't have to agree, no matter how helpful the answer is, then it's wrong because it's not a necessary assumption. So what does the author have to agree with here? One prediction would be the author has to agree that mercury doesn't dissipate or leave dead birds slowly over time. The author has to be assuming that, right? Because if the author didn't believe that, then this conclusion would start to fall apart. Sound good? A, the proportion of a seabird's diet consisting of fish was not as high on average in the 1880s as it is today. Okay, so if the fish, if the birds from a long time ago didn't eat as much fish as they do today. Actually, this is one of the things I think I was talking about. If they didn't eat as much fish as they do today, then that could explain why they have less mercury, not the fact that mercury levels have actually gone up. So if this answer choice were true, this would really hurt the author's argument. So this is something they cannot agree with, right? The author would be like, no. I think they eat the same amount of fish today as they did before. So because the author has to disagree with this answer choice, it is definitely wrong. Okay? I'm looking for something that the author has to agree with. This would hurt the argument. It's not an assumption the argument is making. Anyways, B, the amount of mercury in saltwater fish depends on the amount of pollution in the ocean habitat of the fish. This is probably true, but is this something that the author has to agree with? Well, the author never talked about pollution. The author never talked about how the mercury levels in the saltwater fish are higher. The author is just saying that it is higher. Hey, the levels are higher. How? The author never said how. So does the author have to agree that it's because of pollution? No. They could be like, I don't care how the mercury is higher. It's just higher. So that's wrong. C, mercury derived from fish is essential for the normal growth of a seabird's feathers. Okay. Also, the author does not have to agree with this. The author could say, no, I think mercury is actually very harmful to the fish and to the seabirds. It's just not helpful for anybody. That doesn't have anything to do with the conclusion. D, the stuffed seabirds whose feathers were tested for mercury were not fully grown. Oh, this is like answer choice A. This is not good. I'm guessing that the author is actually assuming the opposite, that the seabirds were fully grown, and that's why they, even though they had less mercury, it wasn't because they were younger, it was actually because they had less mercury in their environment. So we don't want to assume this. This is wrong. E, the process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did not substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. Okay, this is not exactly what I predicted. I predicted that the mercury went away over time, but this is almost like the process itself, maybe when the bird was preserved, took out the mercury. If that were true, then this argument would get undermined. So the author has to be assuming that the process didn't substantially change or decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. If it did, that'd be a big problem. So the author has to agree with this. This is the necessary assumption. Or this is, I shouldn't say the necessary assumption. What I want to say is this is a necessary assumption. There are probably other necessary assumptions being made by this argument, but that doesn't matter. We just need to find one, and this is one of them. Questions? Okay. Does the age of the birds even matter for answer choice D? I think it does matter. I think if the birds were younger, then you could be like, oh, well, there wasn't as much mercury in their feathers because they didn't live as long, so they didn't have as much time to accumulate it. But if that were true, then that would explain why the mercury was lower, not the actual change in mercury in their diet. So here's another question. Are we finding a statement that supports his argument? Yes. So a necessary assumption will help the argument, but that's not the question you're asking yourself. You're not asking yourself, does this support the argument? Your question is this a claim that the author has to agree with? If they did agree with it, it would help the argument on some level. It may not help it very much, but the real problem is if it's not true, then it would destroy the argument. Okay. Yeah, A and D, Carlin, yes, both of them weaken the argument. That's not good. That's definitely not good. It's not something the author doesn't have to agree with a claim that would then ultimately end up hurting the argument. That would be silly. Okay, good questions. Anything else? All right. Let's keep going. Let's go ahead and do set 2. Same thing. When you're done with set 2, fill out the poll so I know which questions to go over. I know there's a decent number of you who want to go over Tasmanian, so happy to do that at the end. Thanks. Okay, thanks for filling out the poll. Looks like most of us are finished. If you're not, sorry for interrupting. Let's go ahead and jump into psychotherapy. That looks like one that most of us want to talk about. Therapist. Cognitive psychotherapy focuses on changing a patient's conscious beliefs. Okay, so this cognitive psychotherapy, I don't know, it's a certain type of psychotherapy, focuses on changing my conscious beliefs. Okay. Focuses on, I don't know if it actually succeeds, but whatever. Thus, cognitive psychotherapy is likely to be more effective at helping patients overcome psychological problems. Okay, it's going to be better than what? Then are forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. Okay, before I go any further, I know that sentence continues, but I just want to stop here because there's enough to digest. We have cognitive psychotherapy that focuses on conscious beliefs. And it sounds like the conclusion, at least so far in this argument, is, hey, that's going to be better at helping people overcome psychological problems than things that focus on unconscious beliefs. That's weird to me because I think a lot of our problems come from our unconscious beliefs. So focusing on our unconscious beliefs sounds more effective to me, but whatever. This person somehow thinks that that's not as effective. And then the last part here does say sense. Okay, so we are going to get one more piece of evidence. Since only conscious beliefs are under the patient's direct conscious control. I'm not sure why that's important. I guess there's an assumption here that if something isn't under your direct conscious control, then maybe you can't change it. Like maybe what this argument is trying to say, but not saying it, is that the psychotherapies that focus on conscious beliefs are better because they focus on something that's under the patient's control, direct conscious control, and therefore can actually be changed, whereas things that focus on unconscious beliefs can't work. I'm trying to understand this argument. None of that is there, right? You guys see that, right? So this is a bad argument because it's like, why does it need to focus on something that's under the patient's direct conscious control? That's an oddly specific phrase too, because what about, it could be something that's not under their direct conscious control, but still under their control in some way. Does the patient even need to control something to change it? Maybe the therapy just changes it for you. I don't know. This argument sucks, right? It's missing some key pieces to try to get to the conclusion. All right. Which one of the following, if true, would most strengthen the therapist's argument? Okay. I would love an answer that says, if you don't try to change something under the patient's direct conscious control, you're not going to change anything. It would be even greater if the LSAT said, you aren't going to change shit. And then I'd be like, wow, okay, pick that answer. That would be very shocking. But anyways, A, psychological problems are frequently caused by unconscious beliefs. Okay. This sounds like a weakener, right? If this is actually what I said, I think most of our problems are unconscious, and this is what this is saying. So going after something that fixes your conscious problems, I'm already moving on. B, it is difficult for any form of psychotherapy to be effective without focusing on mental states that are under the patient's direct conscious control. Okay, it doesn't explain why, but this does address my concern. If it's difficult for any form of psychotherapy to be effective, it's hard for it to work unless you focus on something that's under the patient's direct conscious control, that weird wording, then it's not going to work. So then that would make other therapies more likely to be effective. Yeah, this seems like a decent answer. C, Cognitive psychotherapy is the only form of psychotherapy that focuses primarily on changing the patient's conscious beliefs. Okay, nice. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, this doesn't address the problem of like, what's so special about focusing on things that fall under the patient's direct conscious control, right? And this answer doesn't even address that. So this is wrong. Also, by the way, I think we need to add a period to the end of that answer choice. D, no form of psychotherapy that focuses on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs and desires can be effective. Okay, so far, this answer choice is interesting to me, right? I liked B, but this says, look, nothing out there that focuses on changing unconscious beliefs can be effective unless what? Unless it also helps change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control. Do those therapies that focus on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs also change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control? Anyone? This is your chance to really unpack what the hell is being said here. Okay, Lauren says, we don't know. And that is 100% true. We have no clue. All we know is that we have two kinds of things out there. Cognitive psychotherapy, which focuses on conscious beliefs, and then some other stuff that focuses on unconscious beliefs. But the fact that it focuses on changing unconscious beliefs doesn't tell us anything about what it actually does. So it could end up also helping change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control. We have no idea. It could change conscious beliefs. It's just not something that it's apparently focusing on. And therefore, this unless clause could get triggered, and then they may end up being effective. So this answer, unfortunately, tells us nothing because we don't know if that escape clause is going to be triggered. So that's wrong. E, all of a patient's conscious beliefs are under the patient's under the patient's conscious control. Okay, nice. But other psychological states cannot be controlled effectively without the aid of psychotherapy. Oh, well, you need psychotherapy, but yeah, the question remains, which one? So this is wrong. It doesn't resolve the dispute between the different psychotherapies. The answer is B. Questions. I know a lot of you wanted to go over this one. Ella, you said if everything after the unless wasn't there in answer choice D, would answer choice D be superior? Let's take a look. Actually, it's very hard to speculate on these things because sometimes we just may be missing something. But if D said no form of psychotherapy that focuses on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs and desires can be effective, period. It does sound stronger than B because B just says it's difficult, doesn't say it's impossible. Now, I might be missing something and maybe there's another problem here, but yeah, I think if we didn't have that unless clause, D might end up being the correct answer. And that just comes down to word strength. Philip, I went with B since it detailed why this type of therapy would be effective. Wait, it actually detailed why other types aren't effective, right? I think, is that what you meant maybe? Radina, question.
Can you explain why D was wrong again? Because I was stuck between B and D. So are you saying D is wrong because of the unless?
100%.
Okay.
The unless is like, it's sort of like if I said to you, I'm never going to eat again. Like that claim by itself is shocking, right? It's like, you're never going to eat again. Okay, well, good luck with that, Ben. Like, you know, find a replacement teacher for your class. And then I said, unless it's, you know, unless there's a breeze of like 5 miles an hour. Boom. What I just said, like, becomes, it loses its strength because you're saying, okay, well, I guess if it's ever windy outside, you're going to start eating. So you might end up eating all the time, especially depends on where you live. So
Okay.
that's exactly what happened here. Caitlin, question.
So I picked the right answer. I picked B. And I didn't have an issue. But then when you just said that the only problem with D is the unless, I dismissed it because I thought it was too strong because it said no form of psychotherapy that focuses on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs can be effective. But I thought the therapist said that the one changing your conscious beliefs is likely to be more effective, not that the one that changes your unconscious belief can't be effective at all.
You're right. The therapist didn't say that the other ones don't work. The only claim here is that the cognitive one is more effective, right? But if answer D were true and we got rid of the unless, and no form of psychotherapy that focuses on the unconscious stuff can be effective, that would make it very likely that the other ones are more effective. So that's okay. It's not contradicting the author. Yeah. Cool. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What? You sound a little unsure.
No, I got it. I think I like forgot what the question was at that point, and then I was like, okay, yeah, it would strengthen it. It just like it kind of like contradicted the paragraph, but a little bit.
Well, if I say that I'm taller than yeah, if I say that I'm faster than somebody who doesn't move at all. That's not an inconsistent claim. If I say I'm faster than someone else, they could be very fast, but they could also just not move at all. And so, yeah, that's possible. Cool.
Okay.
Martin.
Hey, Ben. So I also selected what's it called? Was it B? I think it was as well.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, um, you bring up the topic about the difficulty, and that opened my eyes a little bit, and I started to question B when you started going over it a little bit, because I was thinking to myself, yeah, it could be something could necessarily be difficult. However, like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible, right? So
100%. Yep.
couldn't I mean, I could see how that would be the correct answer because like the other answers are terrible, but
Yes.
like it just made me question it when you were going over that, because it could also mean like, yeah, maybe there is one other form of psychotherapy that could work, even though it potentially be difficult.
Yeah, you're totally right. And in fact, think about this for B. It says it's difficult for any form of psychotherapy to be effective without focusing on mental states that are under the patient's direct conscious control. In other words, without focusing on conscious beliefs. But it could be more difficult. I don't know. Anyways, but I don't want to make this more complicated than it has to be. The point is the word difficult does not shut out the possibility that they can work, right? But on the LSAT, it's always about who finishes the race first, not how fast they finish. So
Gotcha.
B beat everybody else. So it's 100% the winner and 100% correct. And we're cheering it on. But if B were competing in a different competition and lost by a half second, then it would be out. And that's why changing answer choice D is an interesting exercise on some level, because if you get rid of unless, now D wins the race.
Right.
Precisely because of that problem you identified.
Exactly. All right. That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Ryan, you said answer choice D doesn't even work unless the action B does is taken. So how can we choose it?
Yeah, Ben, it's saying no form of psychotherapy is used to change unconscious beliefs, right? But unless we do exactly what B does. No?
I wouldn't go that deep into it because D, if we take off the unless clause, says no form. In other words, there's two types of psychotherapy, at least that we know about right now, right? The ones that focus on conscious beliefs and the ones that focus on unconscious beliefs. And this argument is simply claiming that the conscious ones are better or more effective. And D says, hey, the ones that focus on unconscious beliefs don't work if you take off the unless clause. They don't work. They're not effective. They can't be effective. So does that prove the conclusion? Not necessarily. Maybe the other ones aren't effective either, but it certainly strengthens the argument because it says that this second form can't work at all. Cool. All right. Let's keep going. Oh boy, we got 5 minutes left. There's a decent number of you who want to talk about psychologist help. So I apologize. This class is an hour and a half, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this question. Then, yeah, I mean, I guess if you guys are cool with it, obviously you can take off at any time, but that's the beauty of Zoom. But I'm going to go ahead and do this question. Then I'm going to do the questions that we skipped, I think, or at least the open source one. And then if anyone wants to hang out and still do set 3, then we can entertain that idea then. So let's go ahead and do psychologist help. Geez, the LSAT's obsessed with that today. Let's take a look. A consumer magazine surveyed people who had sought a psychologist's help with a personal problem. Okay, so there were some people, they went to a psychologist, they said, help me with this problem. And then a consumer magazine surveyed them. It already sounds a little shady. It's not like researchers. It's like Time magazine. Oh, let's do our own research. Of those responding who had received treatment for 6 months or less, 20% claimed that the treatment made things a lot better. Ooh, only 20%? What did the other 80% have to say? Well, I guess they said it made things a lot better. Maybe the 80% said it made things better. So I kind of took that as a big negative, but maybe it's not a big negative because a lot better is kind of a strong endorsement, right? Maybe others just gave a lukewarm endorsement, or maybe they hated it. I don't know. Of those responding who had received longer treatment, 36% claimed that the treatment made things a lot better. Okay, so the percentage of people who were happy with the treatment went up if they had gotten the treatment longer. Therefore, psychological treatment lasting more than 6 months is more effective than shorter-term treatment. Okay, certainly possible. As with so many conclusions on the LSAT, it could be true, but is this proven? That's the standard. And I would say no, for several reasons. The first problem that comes to my mind is the conclusion is saying that the longer treatment is more effective. More effective. All we know is that these people claimed that it made things a lot better. There's a difference between perception and actual results. Okay, so that's one problem. Second problem is that this study wasn't conducted very well because this argument is assuming that the length of time is what caused people to have better success. That's certainly possible. It's certainly possible that doing things for longer makes it better. But it's also possible that the length of time that people spent doing the therapy is a result of the fact that it was successful. right? Like maybe the fact that you like your therapist is why you keep going to them. So it's not surprising to me that the percentage of people who are happy in long-term therapy goes up, because the people who are unhappy probably left early. So using that logic, we could survey all those who have been here at the Demon for a long time and ask them what they think of the Demon, and then say, oh, well, therefore it must be a great product. They've stuck around for a while, right? So there's probably something about it that they like, more so than people who left earlier, right? Anyways, those are two problems I saw. If you saw any other problems, I'm sure there could be them, but that's enough for me right now. I read the passage. I think I understand it. I read the, then I took in step 2 time to evaluate whether I think the conclusion is proven or not. Sharon, you said it is a great product. Well, thank you. Okay, great. Anyways, question, which one of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? Okay, going after any of those two problems would be a good answer. A, of the respondents who had received treatment for longer than 6 months, 10% said that treatment made things worse. Okay, that's one thing we never talked about in this argument is what did the other respondents think? Were they neutral? Did they hate it? The problem with answer choice A is it tells me that 10% thought it made things worse. Okay, but what was the percentage for those who did less than 6 months? I like, this is a really incomplete piece of information. Okay, B, patients who had received treatment for longer than 6 months were more likely to respond to the survey than those who had received treatment for a shorter time. Okay, they were more likely to respond. Nice. But all that it doesn't change the percentages, right? It just means that there were more participants, but does that mean that they're more likely to respond positively or more likely to respond negatively? It doesn't tell you. It just tells you that the number of respondents is going to be greater. But why? And how? I mean, how are they going to respond? And so since I can't predict that, I can't see if that would explain why the percentage was higher or lower. Lex, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the thing that I was attacking in the argument to prove that it was weak was the fact that it wasn't long enough. Like, first of all, it's a really shitty sample. Obviously it's not a good survey that they were conducting. So what my thought was in choosing that is that you don't have enough, like it weakens it because you don't have enough evidence. Basically, that's what I was going based on.
Are you saying that the people who had 6 months or fewer, there wasn't enough of them to get data?
Yeah, there just wasn't enough. Like I was really
Wait, hold on, Lex. All B says is that people who were getting treatment for 6 months or longer were more likely to respond. So there was presumably, actually, I don't even know if there's more responses because there might be fewer patients who are 6 months or longer, right? But it just means that they were more likely to participate. That doesn't mean, though, that the other ones were not likely to participate. They're just less likely to participate. They could still be a ton of participation.
Yeah, these questions just kill me. Like I'm trying. I just gotta keep practicing.
Yeah, you gotta keep practicing, and that's okay. And I want you to understand what's going on here, because what you're doing is you're taking information and you're reading more into it than is actually there, right? Like if I say that I'm faster than Joe, well, we might conclude that Joe is slow or that I'm fast, but actually both of those things could be totally bogus. Maybe we're both just slow as fuck, or maybe we're both extraordinarily fast. It's just that I'm like a half second faster than Joe, right? So we have to really zoom in on, okay, what is being said here concretely, and what is also not being said here? What do I not know? Because if you impose that on the answer choice, then it's easier to knock it out, even though actually that's not even what it said. Okay, yeah, Radina, go ahead.
So just to make sure, so I got rid of B because it never really touched on the conclusion, which is it was more effective than short-term treatment. Just because they responded to the survey doesn't mean that it was more or less effective. Like that's why I got rid of B.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
We don't
Okay.
know how it changes the results, right? Like if more people respond, okay, well, are the percentages going to change? That's all.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Sunil. Or how do you say your name? Sorry, is it Sunil?
No, you got it. You got it. You got it. Hi, man. What's
Yeah.
going on, man?
Hey.
But don't we know that because the 36% claim that it made things better, that the people who responded are saying that it's better?
We know that a higher ratio of those people are responding, but we don't know how.
But it's saying 36% said that it made things. I got tripped up on B because if more people are replying, then aren't they more likely to fall in that 36% group?
Well, it's true that this second group has a, what is it? It's got a higher participation rate. It's got a higher participation rate, right?
And more of them will be likely to say, hey, it was, I'm feeling
And
better.
more of them say it's good, but we don't know why. Is that because more of them participated? See, what you have to think about, if you say that more of them participated, we want to know something about those additional participants. Like if it said that younger people were more likely to participate, then you're like, oh, so the demographic is like changing. All I know is that the sample size has gotten bigger. And I know what you're saying. It does say 30% claim that the treatment made things a lot better. But the question is why? Is that because the sample size got bigger?
I mean,
Or
could
is
it be
that
like,
because,
hey, no one got benefit from the short-term treatment, so no one responded, and everybody got better after 6 months?
Yeah, that's an assumption you're making, right?
Okay.
You're saying, oh, okay, well, they were more likely to respond because it went well for them. But the reverse could also be true. They were more likely to respond because things actually were shitty for them. Like you're assuming what you're trying to prove.
Okay.
I don't. I wish I could explain this better. Eric, Abigail, maybe. Sunil, I don't know if this is clicking for you.
When you go over C, I have another question when you go over C.
Okay, we'll keep going. So C, patients who feel they are doing well in treatment tend to remain in treatment. Okay, oh, this is the problem, actually, I think I was saying. While those who are doing poorly tend to quit earlier. Okay, so what this is saying is that it's the treatment's success which is causing the time frame to change, right? So that's why people, it's the treatment itself, it's whether the treatment is doing well or not that gets people to stay in it longer, not the fact that it's longer that makes the treatment more successful. And that was the conclusion. Therefore, psychological treatment lasting more than 6 months is more effective than shorter term treatment. No, it's not the fact that it's lasting longer that's making it more effective. It's the fact that it's more effective that's making it last longer.
I was thinking that C proved his argument because it's saying, hey, it's like you're staying in for 6 months because it's getting better. And so I thought that was actually proving their argument that the longer one, they're staying in the treatment and they're staying for longer and they're staying for longer. And finally they get to 6 months and they're feeling better. I thought actually C proved it.
Yeah. So do you still feel that way?
I'm seeing what you're saying. I'm seeing what you're saying.
Okay.
I appreciate what you do, man. I like everything you do, man.
Oh yeah, no worries. I just want to make sure you understand. So try to explain it to yourself or to someone else to a point where you can convince them 100%. And then that will be a good indicator that we're seeing the same problem here. Anyways, Rory, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I just felt my outside knowledge from like stats class and survey samples like come into my head. So stupid now that I look back on it. But I just like, how do you stop your outside knowledge that you have from different topics come in? Because I was like, oh, a problem with the sample size, perfect. But then it wasn't the
Well, no, I
was
think that
flawed.
outside knowledge is good because you can't have like, too small of a survey size. But so the real problem here isn't your outside knowledge, it's misinterpreting what the answers are saying. Did you think that answer choice B was saying that the survey size was too small?
Not really. I thought it was just saying that like there was bias in the results because more people from the 6 month and longer group responded, but then so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's not your outside knowledge because your outside knowledge is right. It's more your understanding of what B is actually saying. I hope that helps. The outside knowledge is good. Okay, cool. Thank you, everyone. Let's pause there. Okay, it's 2:40. Let's do a quick informal survey of those of you who are here now. Thank you for staying, by the way. Not that you had to. How many of you want to go over open source software? And to do this, just raise your hand. Use the Zoom raise hand tool. We can see how many hands we get up. Okay. I don't know how many should be the critical number. I'll leave that to Eric. Okay, so Eric put up both his hands, which is 10. And I think we have over 10. So we will go ahead and do this question. Let's go ahead and do this question. And then if anyone still wants to do set 3, I'm happy to do that. So I'll just go ahead and jump into this. Oh shit, that's a longer passage. Okay, well, let's see what we can do. Commentator, in academic scholarship, sources are always cited and methodology and theoretical assumptions are set out. Okay, sounds good. So as to allow critical study, replication, and expansion of scholarship. Okay, sounds good. In open source software, the code in which the program is written can be viewed and modified by individual users for their purposes without getting permission from the producer or paying a fee. Huh? Okay, open source software. I'm told about open source software. I'm told about academic scholarship. I guess they're both like publicly available. That seems to be the similarity. And thus open to criticism. In contrast, the code of proprietary software is kept secret and modifications can be made only by the producer for a fee. Okay, so the similarity here is academics is free. It's open to the public. It's kind of like open source software, I guess. This shows that. Okay, here's the conclusion. Open source software better matches the values embodied in academic scholarship. Okay. And since scholarship is central to the mission of universities, universities should use only open source software. Okay. I will grant this argument that open source software seems to better reflect the values embodied in academic scholarship. They do seem kind of similar to each other. Does that mean that because scholarship is central to the mission of universities, universities should use only open source software? That could be a very boneheaded move, right? Like maybe their accounting department should use QuickBooks, which is paid and proprietary, not some open source accounting software that most people don't use or understand or can rely on, right? Like it's nice to do everything according to your values, but maybe there are other values that are more important. like just getting the job done. So the commentator's reasoning most closely conforms to which one of the following principles? In other words, what is a belief or an assumption or a rule that this person seems to be following? They seem to be believing that if you have two choices and one choice better reflects some value that's core to your mission, then you should always go with that choice. Okay. A, whatever software tools are most advanced. Okay. I'm stopping there. We never talked about tools that are most advanced. I'm assuming that the open source ones could be worse in some cases, but I don't know that. They could actually be better because they're open source. But advanced, never discussed. Out. B, universities should use the type of software technology that is least expensive. Stop. We never talked about price. C, oh, wait, we did talk about price. We talked about paying a fee. And open source is free. Okay, I guess I'll keep reading. Least expensive, as long as that type of software technology is adequate for the purposes of academic scholarship. Okay, well, we never talked about like, does it work or not work? So that's wrong. That was my objection. I don't think it works, or it might not work, but it's not what was discussed in the passage. It's not what the commentator seems to be believing. C, universities should choose the type of software technology that best matches the values embodied in the activities, such as scholarship, that are central to the mission of the university or universities. Okay. Yeah, that does seem to be what this commentator believes or assumes. So that's probably correct. D, the form of software technology that best matches the values embodied in the activities that are central to the mission of universities. So far, so good. Is the form of software technology that is most efficient for universities to use. We never talked about efficiency. Which one is more efficient, the proprietary one or the open source one? This is wrong. This is almost like if you were tempted by D, you probably made the assumption that if code is open source, it can be more efficient. Like people might be able to fix it more effectively, but we don't know that. E, a university should not pursue any activity that would block the achievement of the goals of academic scholarship at the, okay. Well, that's just too vague and not, we don't know if this open source stuff would block the goals or help the goals or whatever. So this is wrong. The answer is C. Questions on this one? I see some people have their hands up. Do you have questions about this question, or are you keeping your hands up from before? Is it for DOS? Question?
No, I'm sorry. My hand's been up since the
Oh,
beginning.
before. Okay, no worries. Just you guys can take your hands down. Kimberly, you have a question? Aiden? Okay. Aaron, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So I think that I got tripped up on this one because I think I was overanalyzing the wording a little bit too much. Because when you read it out loud, I was like, oh, I feel like it's actually a pretty obvious answer. But when I was reading it, I feel like all of the words kind of got jumbled into my head.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could kind of provide a strategy for how to kind of sort through that. Like I've seen in I think some of your podcasts and in other LSAT forums that, you know, the wording that they're like, whatever they're actually talking about really doesn't matter. It's more so like what the actual argument is. You know, when this wasn't timed, but I know like we have a time limit, so it was like kind of timed. So when you're under that like time limit and you can't go back and reread over and over and over again, and you're not focusing on the words and more of the argument, like what would a good approach to that be?
Actually, don't worry about the time, Aaron. You're gonna have to let that go. So imagine here for a second, and I'm sorry for this analogy, but I think it's spot on. Imagine a sniper or someone who has to shoot an enemy that's coming at them. They can take rapid shots and miss, and then they lose because they just don't nail the target.
Mhm.
But if you take a deep breath and you aim your shot and you get it that first time, then it takes you longer, but problem solved, right? And so if you miss your first shot, you don't understand it, you got to just take a deep breath, slow down, and go slower, because that's going to be faster in the end.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I will give you one other thing to think about, and that is the LSAT uses that phrases or which phrases all the time. So in answer choice C, it says universities should choose the type of software that, okay? And these that phrases on the LSAT tend to be absurdly long. What's the one in this case? It's that best. What kind of technology? Oh, it's the technology that best matches the values embodied in the activities that what? That are central to the mission of the universities. So if you ever find yourself getting sort of lost in that C, just stop for a second and ask yourself, okay, what kind of technology am I talking about? And then read the that clause. Or what kind of activities am I talking about? And then read the that clause. Because you have to understand the activities and they're being defined for you. And then once you understand that, then you can go back to reading the sentence as a whole and replace that long ask that clause with the shorter idea that's now been embedded into your head after you just focused on that particular phrase.
Okay, so you're saying read everything after that and then go back to the beginning and put it all together?
You might need to. Yeah. Like if you
Got it.
find yourself drifting away from the sentence, you're like, oh, starting to lose touch with it. Stop
Mhm.
and just say, okay, what technology am I talking about? Read the that clause, understand the technology, then reread the sentence. And when you reread it, you can cut out that entire that clause because you know what type of technology you're talking about.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, good questions. Good. Wow, it's 2:50. If there's enough of you who want to do set 3, and Eric or Abigail, do you have time to stay or no? Eric, you can stay? Okay.
I can stay.
Oh, okay, great. Well, let's take a vote. If we get what do you say? I don't know, 30 just popped into my head. If 30 of you want to do set 3, we can stay and do set 3. We're at 21, 24. Okay, we just passed 30. Let's go ahead and do it. Thank you everyone for your interest. Go ahead and do set 3 and then fill out the poll when you're done. Thank you very much. Okay. So the questions on these three are pretty evenly distributed. I guess I'll just start with muscles then. So let's take a look. When exercising the muscles in one's back, it is important in order to maintain a healthy back. Okay, if you want to maintain if you want your back to be healthy, then it's important to exercise the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally. I mean, that kind of makes sense to me. It'd be weird if you just did the right side of your body. Seems like that would kind of twist your spine to the right? After all, and by the way, after all is a premise indicator. So there could be exceptions, but I'm expecting some evidence now. I'm expecting this person to explain why I need to exercise the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally. It kind of makes sense to me, but I'd love to know why. Okay, after all, balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back. Okay, your muscles need to be equally developed or balanced, since the muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment. Yeah, this kind of makes sense. And protect the spine. Okay. So, interesting. Overall, this argument makes sense to me, so it's harder to be critical. That said, my job is to be as critical as possible. And the conclusion is the first sentence. And it's saying, hey, if you want a healthy back, you got to exercise the muscles equally. Why? Because you need balanced muscle development, right? Notice that nothing in the premise, the last sentence, talks about exercise. So if you see something in the conclusion that's never mentioned in the premises, focus on that, because there is an assumption going on here. The assumption is that to get balanced muscle development, you need exercise. You need balanced exercise, really. Right? There's an assumption here that, okay, we're going from development to exercise, but could you have unequal exercise and still have balanced development? Like, for example, could I exercise just one more rep on the right side of my spine? Would that actually mess things up? Or does it just have to be close? Because the conclusion said you need to exercise the muscles on opposite sides equally. What if I just did a little bit more? Is that really going to mess things up? I doubt it. But anyways, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? Okay, it's asking for a necessary assumption. My prediction here is that this author needs to assume, or is assuming, that if you want to get balanced muscle development, you also have to have balanced exercise. And I'm wondering if that's actually true. Could your exercise be a little bit different and still have balanced muscle development? Like, it doesn't really matter that much. A, muscles on opposite sides of the spine that are equally well developed will be enough to keep the back in proper alignment. Okay. The conclusion was saying that, hey, if you want to have a healthy back, this is something you have to do. You have to exercise equally on both sides of the spine. That's not saying that if you do that, your back is going to be healthy. Same in the premises. The premises say balanced muscle development is needed if you want to have a healthy back. That doesn't mean, though, that if you do it, you will have a healthy back. You could have other needs, right? Maybe you also need a healthy diet. Okay. So when A says muscles on opposite side of the spine that are equally well developed will be enough, that's it. You don't need anything else to keep the back in proper alignment. No, you might also need good genes, because there might be genetic things out there that prevent you from having proper alignment, even if your muscles are equally well developed on both sides. So the argument doesn't need to assume this. It's not making that sort of claim. It's not going that far. B, exercising the muscles on opposite sides of the spine unequally tends to lead to unbalanced muscle development. I mean, yeah, the argument, the person is assuming this, right? They're saying, hey, you have to exercise each side equally. If you don't, you're going to have problems. In other words, you're going to have unbalanced muscle development, and that's why you need to exercise equally. So this does appear to be a necessary assumption. The author has to agree with this. If this weren't true, then why exercise equally? C, provided that one exercises the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally, one will have a generally healthy back. This is the same problem as answer choice A. The person isn't saying that exercising equally will guarantee success. They're just saying if you don't exercise equally, you're going to fail. Okay. So that's wrong. D, if the muscles on opposite sides of the spine are exercised unequally, one's back will be irreparably damaged. No, just won't be healthy. So this is definitely not something that needs to be assumed. E, one should exercise daily. Okay. No, we're done with this because we never talked about the frequency. So answer choice B is the correct answer. Questions on this one? So Erica, you said, I guess I thought for answer choice A that the back in proper alignment to keep your back in proper alignment and maintaining a healthy back weren't the same thing. Yeah, you're right. They're different. You're absolutely right. And maybe I equated them as I was talking about answer choice A. You thought proper alignment was a step to a healthy back. You're absolutely right. I don't think but we still have the same problem. I don't think that. Okay, so the premise says, since muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine, therefore you must have balanced muscle development. Okay, again, it's just telling us what we need to do to get proper alignment. It's not saying that if we do it, we will have proper alignment. We could have other problems come in and prevent us from having proper alignment. It's just a necessary step that we have to take to get there. I hope that helps, Erica. James, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me? I'm on my
Yep.
CarPlay and stuff. I had to do it from work today. So my only question on LSAT Demon's website, almost every logical reasoning question I get wrong is a necessary assumption one. And every time when I pull up the explanation, I'm always like hitting it says, oh, that's sufficient, but not necessary. So mine, and then I read the explanation and I get why I'm wrong when I read it. Is there any kind of general framework for sussing out the difference between sufficient and necessary when you're looking at if I'm looking at an answer, I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Is there any type of kind of basic framework for being like, well, that's good, but it's probably sufficient, not necessary? Because that's where I seem to get screwed up the most.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, a lot of people get confused with these kinds of things because they're not even sure which type of question they're in. So they read which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument, and they think, oh, sufficient assumption. It's like, what? Actually, it's looking for a necessary assumption. So one, you got to get oriented there. But two, if you do know that you're looking for a necessary assumption, just keep this in mind. In necessary assumption questions, you're asking yourself which answer has to be true. You can treat it like a must be true question. In sufficient assumption questions, you're not asking which answer has to be true. In fact, you're doing the exact opposite. You're saying which answer, if it were true, not that it has to be, but if it were, would it prove the conclusion? Those are
Okay.
the two differences.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay. Let's keep going. Let's go to voters' lives. Editor, many candidates say that if elected, they will reduce government intrusion into voters' lives. Okay, there's a lot to, I mean, this is a fairly straightforward sentence, but there are a lot of things that immediately come to mind because these are things that the LSAT tests a lot. Okay, first, many candidates. That means some. So I know some candidates are saying this for sure. I have no clue what the rest of the candidates are actually saying. Okay, so just applies to some of them. It's what they say. And what candidates say it might be related to what they ultimately end up doing, but it doesn't have to, right? We should learn this from politics. People say things all the time that they don't actually end up doing. So, also what you say is not necessarily what you believe. So far, I know some candidates are saying something, and all I know is that they're saying it. And what are they saying? They're saying if they are elected, they will reduce government intrusion into voters' lives. That is also vague. So I don't know what the fuck that means. Like, okay, less government intrusion. What is government intrusion? I don't know. Anyways, but voters actually elect politicians who instead promise that the government will provide assistance to solve their most pressing problems. That's kind of interesting, actually. So apparently, I'm learning a lot here. Voters don't elect these folks. They elect politicians who instead, in other words, do something else, who say that the government will provide assistance to solve their most pressing problems. So apparently this first group of candidates don't win, and this second group of candidates does win. Notice both groups, we're still just talking about what they say or promise. We're not talking about what they actually do. Governmental assistance, however, costs money. Fair. And money can come only from taxes. I don't know if that's true, but I'll just accept it as true because it's presented as a fact, which can be considered a form of government intrusion. Okay, the LSAT doesn't do this very often, but when it does, alarm bells should be going off because it's not telling me that taxes is a form of government intrusion. It's just saying it can be considered a form of government intrusion. So my question back to the editor is, well, is it? Like, be straight with me. Is taxes a form of government intrusion or not? You're just saying it could be considered that. I don't even know if other people actually even consider it that way. It just said it can be considered that way. You guys see this? This is the sort of critical, annoyed tone you should have with the LSAT. Okay, so I don't know very much at all right now. All I know is that candidates who promise government assistance are the ones who get elected. That's all I know. Thus, governmental intrusion into the lives of voters will rarely be substantially reduced over time in a democracy. I have no fucking clue because I don't know if taxes is actually a form of governmental intrusion. I don't know if the people who promise to provide assistance will actually provide assistance. Maybe what they'll do is they'll get elected and reduce government intrusion. Right? So I know nothing. Thank you for this conclusion, which is totally unsupported. Which one of the following, if true, would most strengthen the editor's argument? I love the editor to fix any of the problems that I just said. Okay. A, politicians who win their elections usually keep their campaign promises. Oh, well, okay. If they keep their campaign promises, then the ones who said they would provide government assistance would actually end up doing that, which was one of my concerns. Is that a form? Would that lead to taxes? Yes. Is that a form of governmental intrusion? Maybe. So there are still other problems in this argument, but this one does solve a big one. So I would keep it open. B, politicians never promise what they really intend to do once in office. This would weaken the argument. It would say what they promise to do is irrelevant. C, the most common problems people have are financial problems. So what? What does that have to do with, okay. Even if they're not financial problems, like they could still cost money to solve, like healthcare problems. Anyways, so that doesn't help. D, governmental intrusion into the lives of voters is no more burdensome in non-democratic countries. I don't care if it's not as big of a problem or it's the same problem elsewhere. The point is whether or not it will get reduced in democracies. And this doesn't address any of the problems I addressed. E, politicians who promise to do what they actually believe ought to be done are rarely elected. We never talked about their actual beliefs. We don't care about their actual inner mindset. All we care about is what did they promise to do and did they do that or not? Whether they believed in it is a totally different issue. So the answer is A. Questions on this one? This is your chance. Brett.
Yeah, so usually I have a difficulty with questions where I don't like any of the answers upon first read, and I didn't like any of these. The problem I had with A was that A states a general concept, and I found so many issues with the stimulus that I didn't like it. Could you tell me why you thought that A made sense with this, or what you think maybe my issue is with these kind of questions?
Yeah, so I think your problem is recognizing up front as you're reading the argument that when the LSAT tells you what people say or argue or believe, and I guess those are not all exactly the same thing, but when the LSAT is saying that, that's telling you something different from what they actually do.
Say that again.
So the LSAT told us in the first, or this editor told us in the first two sentences about what candidates say or promise. But we can't conclude from that because they made those promises, they will actually do them. And this is something that is tested over and over and over on the test. There's a big difference between what I say and what I do.
Okay, so if it's true that politicians who win their elections usually keep their campaign promises, if that's true as a general statement, then that strengthens this argument, because then it would be true that voters usually elect politicians who promise that the government would provide assistance to solve their problems. So if
Brett, not quite. What you're saying is, oh, if A is true, then this second sentence is true. That second sentence in the passage is already true. We have to accept that voters actually elect politicians who promise to provide assistance. But just because they end up electing them doesn't mean that those candidates who promise to provide assistance will actually end up providing assistance.
Yeah, I agree. That's a problem I had with the
passage,
with the question.
Yeah.
Initially. I'm just not good with questions. I'm not good with answer supported question types, and I also have a problem a lot with the questions where I don't like any of the answer choices upon first read. So that's why I had a difficulty with this one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do want to get back to why you skipped over A in the first place. I don't think it has to do with the fact that you didn't like all the answer choices. I think it more has to do with the fact that you didn't see how A fixes the problem you had with the original argument. Because the problem, yeah.
I saw it. Yeah, I guess part of the problem is that I don't know why it fixed it, because I could still look at it and okay, so it says the first sentence that the argument as a whole is saying here's what candidates say, but here are the people who actually get elected, right? That's what the argument. That's what the argument is saying. But it's not saying that. It just says voters actually elect politicians who instead promise that the government will provide assistance to solve their most pressing problems. Yeah, that just seemed really general, as in voters actually elect. It gives no quantifiable caveat to it, for lack of a better word.
Brett, I feel like you're like overthinking some parts of this, or you're like being overly critical here. All that second sentence is saying is that, look, voters tend to elect, they actually elect. Who do they put into office? They put into office people who promise to do things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if voters put into office people who promise to do things,
how often is that?
How often?
Yeah.
Who cares? It sounds like most of the time or almost all the time.
Okay. I guess
it sounds like all the time, because it says voters actually elect. Who do they actually elect? Oh, they elect the ones who promise to do shit. Mm-hmm. And so now then the argument goes on and it says, oh, well, these things cost a lot of money. And so, that's intruding into our lives. And it's like, yeah, if those politicians end up doing what they promised.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So A is the right answer here. Your opinion of B through E, is your opinion of B through E, are they all dog shit? Or could you see an answer in there that is...
Yeah, they're all bad. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought of all of them too. And it's just, I had a hard time picking A because I thought that the rest of them were dog shit, but I just didn't like A either. So yeah.
I think A is actually a great answer. Not to make you feel bad, but you got to articulate why, like, okay, they promised to do these things and they were elected. And it sounds like you had this objection. Well, just because they promised to do it doesn't mean they're actually going to do it. So yet this argument is assuming that they're going to go ahead and do what they promise. It never said that politicians do what they promise. And so if you take it and you stick it into the argument, you inject it in there, it's going to get a lot better, because you're like, oh, wow, people actually do, or politicians do what they promise they're going to do. Now I know they're going to provide that government assistance.
Okay. I got the question right. What I'm trying to figure out is I wasn't confident in my answer, and I'm trying to figure out where my error in reasoning was at, such that I didn't like this answer when I read it, I guess.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is I think you need to articulate exactly what you don't like about the argument more clearly.
Okay. Do you think that my error was in my understanding of the passage or my understanding of the answer choice?
Probably both.
Okay. All right. I guess I'll just you've helped me. I think I just need to review it and figure out which one was more. Okay, I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the last one, just in the interest of time. We should accept the proposal to demolish the old train station because the local historical society, which vehemently opposes this, is dominated by people who have no commitment to long-term economic well-being. Okay, so hold on. Wait, we should accept the proposal to demolish the old... Okay, so someone's saying get rid of the old train station. Then there's the local historical society who's like, no, keep the old train station. And apparently that society is dominated by people who have no commitment to long-term economic well-being. And that's why we should accept a proposal to get rid of the old train station. We don't like the fact that they have this lack of commitment. I mean, is they could still be right, even though they're not committed to long-term economic well-being. I'm not even sure that committing to long-term economic well-being is a good goal. Maybe the next sentence will make it so. Preserving old buildings creates an impediment to new development, which is critical to economic health. Okay. Keeping old buildings around is bad for economic health, but is economic health like the end all be all? Like if this passage said, by the way, the most important thing in life is economic growth, economic health, even then this argument would be bad, because I would still then need to know that people who don't have a commitment to long-term economic health are wrong about whatever they're deciding about. Like, just because you don't share the same goal doesn't mean that the specific recommendation you're making isn't a good one, right? Like, it could still be in the long-term benefit of the economy, despite the fact that some people on the historical society are opposed to it and don't have this long-term commitment. So there's at least two big problems here. One, who knows whether economic health is even a worthy goal? Two, even if it is, just because some people don't have that goal doesn't mean that their advice will help achieve that goal. Right? Like, I hope that makes sense. The fact that they lack a commitment to economic well-being doesn't mean that their advice won't actually help economic well-being. It might. Right. Someone could be like, I really want what's best for the community. Okay, that doesn't mean that every piece of advice that they give will actually help the community. It might end up hurting the community. So anyways, their mindset doesn't really matter that much. Two big problems. Anyways, the question says, the flawed reasoning exhibited by the argument above is most similar to that exhibited by which one of the following arguments? Okay, I want one that doesn't lay out or explain that economic health is a good goal, or doesn't, or relies on the motives of some people who oppose whatever they're trying to advocate for. Okay, A, our country should attempt to safeguard works of art that it deems to possess natural cultural significance. Okay, why? These works might not be recognized as such by all taxpayers or even all critics. But I don't know what, it's not, they might not be recognized as such. Are they opposed to them? Do they even have any awareness of them? In the original argument, the local historical society was opposed, and dramatically so, right, against this proposal. This sounds like these people don't even, they're like, oh, they're not recognized, or I don't know. They might not be. This is way too weak and inconsistent with the original argument. B, documents of importance to local heritage should be properly preserved and archived for the sake of future generations. Okay, why? 4, if even one of these documents is damaged or lost, the integrity of the historical record as a whole will be damaged. All right. That has nothing to do with people's motivations or their goals or their mindsets or why we should do something based on those mindsets. So this is wrong. C, you should have your haircut no more than once a month. Okay. Why? After all, premise indicator, beauticians suggest that their customers have their haircut twice a month, and they do this as a way of generating more business for themselves. This is kind of similar. They have a motive that would suggest that their advice is bad, therefore don't follow their advice. But just because you have a motive that suggests your advice is bad doesn't mean that your actual advice is bad. And that's the same problem we have with the historical society. They have a motive that might suggest that their advice will be inconsistent with the economic well-being of the area. But just because they have this motive doesn't mean that their actual advice will hurt the economy. It might actually be good for the economy. So I would, yeah, C sounds good. D, the committee should endorse the plan to postpone construction of the new expressway. Why? Many residents of the neighborhoods that would be affected are fervently opposed to that construction, and the committee is obligated to avoid alienating those residents. Actually, I didn't even need to read further. The advice to endorse the plan to postpone is consistent with this group as opposed to inconsistent with the group, right? The original argument, the advice or the conclusion was inconsistent with the local historical society's recommendation. So D is wrong because these two things are consistent with each other. E, one should not borrow even small amounts of money unless it is absolutely necessary. Once one borrows a few dollars, the interest starts to accumulate. This doesn't have anything to do with people's opinions or motives or anything like that. So that's wrong. The answer is definitely C. Questions on this one? Okay, comment here. I had a really hard time with this question just because I totally didn't understand what logic the passage was trying to use. Yeah, the argument in the original passage was pretty bad, and maybe that's why you struggled. You do want to sit on that a little longer and just say, okay, why exactly is this problematic? And there were at least two problems. Okay. Okay, great. Any other questions? Yeah, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, I got C right the second time around, but A, I accidentally clicked that one. But can you explain real quick why A was the wrong answer?
Sure. The main problem that I landed on without even reading the whole answer choice is essentially the word might. We know that the local historical society was vehemently opposed to this plan. Don't do it. That's what they said. And then the conclusion was, oh, well, we should accept it. We should do the plan because they're so opposed to it. Answer choice A just says, these works might not be recognized as such by all taxpayers. Huh? We don't know where they stand on this issue. Not good.
Gotcha. So it's a little bit weak, was the language of it?
It's a lot weak.
Okay. Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I mean, there might be other problems with this answer, like if we kept reading, but that's good enough. It's just not the same. Okay. Cool. Any other questions on this one? Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Eric and Abigail, for staying longer. That was a long haul for all of those of you who did stay. Have a good Monday. Best of luck with everything.